I won the case. My client was free. But the judge's final decision wasn't a victory. It was a trap, forcing me to become the very thing I'd spent my life fighting, or watch everything I cared about burn. The oak of the judge's bench felt cold, even through the heavy fabric of my best suit. I remember the sterile smell of the courtroom, that mix of old paper, lemon pledge, and nervous sweat. It was the kind of smell that clung to you, a souvenir of failure. My palms were slick, but I kept them pressed flat against the polished mahogany of the defense table. Across from me, the prosecutor, a smug little man named Henderson, was already leaning back, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He knew he had this one in the bag. I was defending Mr. David Miller, a good man, a hard-working father of two, caught in a bureaucratic nightmare over some zoning paperwork that Henderson was spinning into intentional fraud. The evidence was circumstantial, the intent non-existent, but in this county, under this system, intent didn't matter as much as the color of the man sitting at my table. Henderson had done his usual song and dance, rhetoric over substance, fear over fact. The jury had barely looked up. Then Judge Thompson cleared his throat. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tense room. Thompson was an old-school jurist, rumored to be deeply conservative, always leaning toward the state. I braced myself. This was it. The dismissal, the guilty verdict, the end of David Miller's savings, maybe even his freedom. I looked at David. His face was gray. His shoulders slumped. He looked like a man waiting for a firing squad. Members of the jury, Thompson began, his voice gravelly. Having heard all the evidence presented by the prosecution and the defense, the court must now instruct you on the matter of the charges brought against Mr. David Miller. He went on for what felt like an eternity, reciting arcane legal boilerplate. Henderson was practically humming with anticipation. I squeezed my eyes shut for a split second, saying a silent prayer I hadn't uttered since law school. We'd fought tooth and nail. We'd presented witnesses. We'd shown the paper trail proving the mistake was an error by the city planning office, not malice on David's part. It didn't matter. Thompson had already made up his mind the moment we walked in. Okay, therefore, Judge Thompson finally declared, leaning forward, his face unreadable in the bright overhead lights. On the charge of felony fraud, this court finds the defendant. He paused. The silence was crushing. I could hear the clock ticking on the back wall, each second an eternity. I waited for the word. Guilty. Not guilty. The air left my lungs in one violent rush. I didn't move. Sure, I'd misheard. Henderson physically recoiled, his jaw dropping so low I thought he might choke on his own smugness. The courtroom erupted into a low, stunned murmur. David Miller slowly lifted his head, tears welling in his eyes, disbelief warring with overwhelming relief. "Wait," Henderson stammered, scrambling to his feet, scattering his notes. "Your Honor, that is an egregious miscarriage of justice. The evidence clearly showed intent. I demand a mistrial. I demand—" "Mr. Henderson, you will sit down," Judge Thompson commanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "The jury has been polled, and the finding stands. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Court is adjourned." Henderson looked like he'd been slapped across the face with a wet fish. He sputtered one last inarticulate protest before sinking back into his chair, red-faced and sputtering about appeals. David Miller was already gripping my arm so hard I thought my circulation might stop, whispering thank yous that were more like sobs. I managed a small, tired smile. We had won. Against the odds, against the system, we had won. I gathered our meager files, feeling a genuine surge of professional satisfaction. This was why I did it. The rare moments you actually pull someone back from the abyss. As the rest of the courtroom began to thin out, David and I walked toward the side exit, feeling the weight of the day lift from our shoulders. I glanced back toward the bench just to see Judge Thompson gathering his robes. He looked different. He wasn't glaring. He was looking directly at me, his expression a strange mixture of anxiety and intense scrutiny. I gave him a quick professional nod, the gesture of a lawyer acknowledging the bench after a hard-fought battle. He didn't nod back. Instead, he slid off his black judicial robe. Beneath it, he wasn't wearing his usual gray pinstripes. He was wearing a suit I recognized immediately, a deep, almost midnight blue, tailored to perfection, with an insignia on the lapel that screamed authority. It was the uniform of the state's highest legal office. Judge Thompson, no, former Judge Thompson, stood up straighter, shedding the robes like a snake shedding old skin. He looked younger without them, sharper, more dangerous. He motioned me over, not waiting for me to reach the bench. "Counsel," he said, his voice dropping its judicial resonance, becoming something colder, more precise. "A word, if you please." Outside. I paused, confused. Why was a recently retired or temporarily sidelined judge speaking to me like this? David squeezed my arm again, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. "I'm sorry, Judge," I said, trying to keep my tone respectful but firm. "Mr. Miller and I are heading out. We've had a long day." Thompson ignored David completely, his eyes locked on mine. "This is important. It concerns your future, and perhaps mine." He stepped down from the dais, Enki descending the 2 steps that separated the judiciary from the rest of us. He walked right up to the defense table, putting his hands flat on the wood where David's had just been. "You performed admirably in that defense, Counselor," he said, a hint of genuine admiration in his voice, which only made the situation weirder. "You found the exact legal loophole that allowed Mr. Miller to walk, precise, unexpected, and absolutely infuriating to the state's prosecution team." I shifted uncomfortably. "Thank you, Your Honor, but I just followed the law." "Indeed," he agreed, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "And because you followed the law so effectively, you have now made yourself a problem. Or perhaps," he leaned in further, his breath smelling faintly of mints, "an asset." He reached into the inside pocket of his new blue suit and pulled out a single cream-colored envelope, thick and official-looking. He didn't hand it to me. He placed it deliberately in the exact center of my case file. "I trust you've heard the news about the vacancy?" he asked, a cryptic little smile playing on his lips. "The Attorney General's office?" I asked blankly. "Yes, the previous AG resigned suddenly last week. I heard they were scrambling to find a replacement before the primary filings." "Scrambling is an understatement," Thompson murmured. "They were panicking. The governor needed someone fast, someone clean, someone who clearly understands how to win cases, even against insurmountable odds." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air like the scent of ozone before a storm. Then he delivered the final blow, his voice ringing with an authority that transcended any bench he'd ever sat on. "Congratulations, Counselor. As of 3 hours ago, the governor accepted my resignation, and I accepted his appointment to the Attorney General's office. I start Monday." He tapped the envelope with one perfectly manicured finger. "And my first official act, before I even clear out my chambers, is to sign the executive order finalizing the transition team appointments. Open that envelope, Counselor. You'll find your commission papers." I stared at the envelope, then back at the man who was no longer Judge Thompson, but something far more formidable. The silence in the emptying courtroom was absolute, broken only by the faint shuffling of the clerk packing up near the door. Oblivious to the tectonic shift happening at the defense table, David Miller, still rooted to the spot next to me, had gone completely still, his relief from moments ago curdling into a fresh, paralyzing terror. "You're joking," I managed, my voice sounding thin and weak. The former judge smiled, a genuine, chilling smile that never once reached his eyes. "Do I look like a man who jokes about judicial appointments, Counselor? Or about crushing the opposition? You just watched me dismiss a case I was expected to win for the state. Do you think the governor didn't notice that moment of judicial independence? Or perhaps," he leaned in again, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "he noticed that you, a public defender for the last 8 years, Amber managed to dismantle Henderson's entire fabricated case in front of a packed house?" I cautiously picked up the envelope. It was heavy, the paper thick, bearing the embossed seal of the state capitol. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal. Inside were several perfectly typed documents. The top sheet was a formal letter of appointment, bearing the governor's signature and a date that had passed mere hours ago. The title beneath my name was unmistakable. Deputy Attorney General, Lead Prosecutorial Division. "This is impossible," I whispered, reading the salary figure, which was enough to buy the entire building we were standing in. "I defend people, sir. I fight the state. I don't join it. Especially not your side." Thompson chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. That's the beauty of it, counselor. You've proven you know how to win. Now, i.e., you get to learn how to enforce. You see, the system isn't broken, counselor. It's just poorly managed. And I intend to manage it. You are excellent at finding the tiny cracks in the foundation, the error in procedure, the misplaced document, the reasonable doubt. Now I need you to use that microscopic vision to find the cracks in our opposition. David finally found his voice, a raw sound laced with panic. Mr. Miller is free, right? We won. He's walking out of here. Thompson turned slowly to David, his expression hardening back into something judicial, something dismissive. Mr. Miller's case, as pertains to the charges filed last Tuesday, is indeed dismissed. However, my predecessor in the AG's office, the man who resigned so abruptly, was overseeing several ongoing investigations into the Miller family's construction business regarding alleged environmental violations from 5 years ago. Those matters are now under my purview. David stumbled back as if physically struck. The old EPA fines. We settled those. We paid every cent. Settled, yes, Thompson agreed smoothly. But the records we recovered yesterday suggest those settlements were obtained through fraudulent documentation provided by your former accountant, who has conveniently just fled the country. A far more substantial charge, wouldn't you say? One that warrants a formal indictment next week. He paused, letting the weight of the threat settle. You walk free today, Mr. Miller. But if your attorney accepts this appointment, I guarantee those new charges disappear into the abyss. I felt a cold dread snake up my spine. This wasn't recruitment. This was coercion, legal blackmail of the highest order. I looked at David, his face a portrait of utter defeat, realizing that his freedom was now inextricably tied to my career decision. You're asking me to sell out my entire professional ethos to save my client from a charge that wasn't even on the radar 5 minutes ago, I stated flatly, gripping the appointment letter so tightly the paper threatened to tear. I'm asking you to leverage your talent for a better position, Thompson corrected me. And yes, to save your client. Think of it as paying your dues. You start Monday as my top gun, fighting the good fight for the state, the real good fight, the one that matters. And by Tuesday morning, all records pertaining to Mr. Miller's past environmental liability will be permanently sealed under executive privilege. He straightened his tie, radiating absolute confidence. The choice is yours, counselor. Freedom for Miller, career advancement for you under my command. Or you walk out that door empty-handed, I authorize the indictment by lunch, and you get to spend the rest of the year filing motions to delay the inevitable collapse of your client's life. The clerk finally finished packing and hurried out the door, leaving us alone with the vast, echoing silence of the empty chamber. I looked down at the letter, then at David, whose eyes were pleading with me, not for victory, but for survival. I could feel the temptation, the intoxicating lure of power, of influence, of finally having the resources to fight the system from the inside. But at what cost? I took a deep, ragged breath, feeling the entire trajectory of my life pivot on the next few words. I looked up at the former judge, meeting his unwavering gaze. Fine, I heard myself say, the word tasting like ash. I accept the appointment. But let's be absolutely clear, Thompson. You save Miller's business on Tuesday, or I will spend every day after that finding every single administrative error in your tenure and burn this whole office down around your ears. Thompson's triumphant smile finally broke through. He extended his hand, not for a handshake, but to tap the envelope again. An excellent negotiation, Deputy AG. I knew you'd see the light. Now, about Monday morning, we have a lot to discuss regarding the prosecution of high-profile corruption cases. Specifically, he lowered his voice once more, the final dreadful whisper in the huge room. We need to review the file on the state treasurer's ongoing embezzlement investigation. It's been stalled for months. I need a hard recommendation on whether we charge him before the end of the fiscal quarter. And I need you to be very, very persuasive. The weight of the commission in my hand suddenly felt less like a lifeline for David, and more like a lead anchor chaining me to the very machine I'd spent my career opposing. I shook Thompson's hand numbly, the grip surprisingly firm. David Miller, looking physically ill, managed a choked, "Thank you," before retreating quickly toward the exit, needing space to process his narrow escape. As the door clicked shut behind David, the sterile atmosphere of the courtroom seemed to warp, becoming Thompson's private launchpad. He stepped back toward the bench, picking up his own briefcase, which looked decidedly less imposing than the judicial robes it had replaced. "Good. Let's establish some ground rules immediately," Thompson said, already moving into management mode. "You report directly to me. No layers, no middle managers. You'll be housed in the executive wing. The resources available to you are effectively limitless, and I expect results that reflect that investment. Your predecessor, Henderson, the man you just decimated, will be reassigned to traffic court misdemeanors starting immediately. Consider it a lesson in professional courtesy." I tried to keep my expression neutral, to compartmentalize the nausea rising in my throat. "Understood, Deputy AG. Regarding the Treasurer's file, who is leading that investigation currently? I need background, evidence logs, everything that's been tabled." Thompson stopped at the entryway, adjusting his expensive watch. "That's the delicate part, Deputy. The Treasurer, a man named Alistair Vance, is an old family friend of the Governor. The investigation has been intentionally slow-walked. The evidence pointing to embezzlement is overwhelming. We're talking tens of millions diverted into offshore accounts over 3 years, but every time the lead prosecutor gets close to presenting a formal indictment, something happens. Witnesses recant, documents vanish, or the crucial piece of forensic accounting gets misfiled." He looked at me, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "I want Vance indicted and convicted before the first snow hits the Capitol, and I need you to be the one to do it. You proved you can find the microscopic detail that sinks a ship. Now, find the detail that sinks a Titan." "If the leads are being intentionally suppressed," I argued, pushing back slightly, but testing the boundaries of my new leash, "then this isn't a matter of finding evidence. It's a matter of finding the people suppressing it. That means investigating other state actors. That's outside the scope of a standard prosecutorial role." Thompson leaned against the doorframe, blocking my exit, forcing me to confront the reality of my new position. "Welcome to the Executive Division, Deputy. The scope is whatever I say it is. Vance isn't just skimming from the state coffers. Counselor, he's got deep ties to the construction industry, specifically the same shadowy consortium that's been pushing those controversial rezoning bills through the legislature for the last decade. The same consortium that David Miller almost derailed today, had Henderson been competent. The connection hit me like a physical blow. David's zoning issue hadn't been random bureaucratic sludge. It was connected to the very powers Thompson was now asking me to fight, or more accurately, to fight for him. "You mean the people who bought off the city council?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Precisely. Vance is their bagman. You take down Vance, you create a vacuum of influence. You take down the men funding the rezoning efforts, and you make yourself indispensable to the governor. This isn't about punishing small-time fraud anymore, Deputy. This is about restructuring power in the state." He pulled a secure burner phone from his inner jacket pocket, its plastic casing strangely warm. He pressed a single button, and the phone immediately began ringing on the desk. "This phone is yours. Encrypted communication only. Oh, don't ever use your personal line for official business, not even for coffee orders. I've already scheduled your first meeting with the Treasury forensics team for 7 a.m. sharp tomorrow. They're waiting for your authorization to bypass several layers of internal review to access Vance's private ledgers." He tossed the phone to me. I caught it reflexively. It felt alien in my hand, a device loaded with lethal potential. "One more thing, Deputy," Thompson continued, his demeanor shifting suddenly, becoming almost paternal, yet laced with threat. "I need you to understand the gravity of the loyalty you've just sworn. I've made a huge political gamble putting you here, overriding years of established protocol to bring you in. The legislature hates it. The old guard hates it. Henderson is already lining up allies to undermine you." He took a slow step back, gesturing toward the massive empty courtroom. "This room? It's where careers go to die, or to be reborn. You're reborn now. But remember this. I am the only shield between you and the forces you are about to provoke. The moment you even hesitate, the moment you think about leaking anything about this transition, or about David Miller's immunity, or about the real scope of Vance's operation to the press, the moment you try to go back to being the champion of the underdog, that shield disappears. And when that shield is gone, Deputy, Thompson's face became completely devoid of warmth. The very system you thought you were defending will crush you first. He turned to leave, pausing at the grand double doors of the courtroom. One final detail about the treasurer, Vance, Thompson called back over his shoulder, his voice echoing one last time in the vast space. The governor assured me this investigation needed to move fast because Vance isn't just embezzling money. He's been using those funds to pay off a highly specialized team of mercenaries. They were hired to intimidate, or potentially silence, the key witness in the case. A witness the FBI had placed in protective custody last month. A witness I need you to locate and secure by the end of the week, because right now, Deputy AG, we have absolutely no idea where she is, and I have a sinking feeling Vance's hired muscle might find her before we do. The heavy doors of the courtroom swung shut with a sound of finality, leaving me standing alone on the well, the scent of lemon pledge suddenly sickeningly sweet. Thompson was gone, taking the last vestiges of my old life with him, leaving only the weight of an impossible job and a burner phone vibrating ominously in my palm. Deputy Attorney General. Me, the man who built his career fighting the machinery, now tasked with fine-tuning its deadliest weapon. I stared at the phone, the symbol of my Faustian bargain. David Miller was safe, for now. That had to be the bedrock. I had leveraged my conscience for his security, and I had exactly 1 week to make that trade worthwhile before the wolves Thompson had unleashed on the treasurer started circling me. I didn't go home that night. I bypassed the executive wing entirely, taking the burner phone directly to a secure, off-site location I used only for the most sensitive investigations. A dingy, more windowless office I rented under an assumed LLC name downtown, a place far removed from the polished marble of the Capitol. If I was going to dismantle Alistair Vance, I couldn't do it under Thompson's direct, suffocating oversight right away. I needed to understand the terrain of this new war zone. The Treasury forensics team was scheduled for 7 a.m., but I needed intelligence the established government channels wouldn't provide. I spent the night diving into the sparse public records regarding Vance's alleged offshore activity, cross-referencing them with the zoning case David Miller had inadvertently uncovered, the one that had put me on Thompson's radar. The connection was clearer than Thompson had let on. Vance wasn't just laundering money. He was using the embezzled funds to secure land options for massive, environmentally destructive developments that circumvented state conservation laws, the very laws David's construction company was refusing to violate, which led to the manufactured fraud charge. Henderson hadn't been trying to convict David for fraud. He was trying to bankrupt him before he could testify about the development consortium's land grabs. By 6:30 a.m. I had compiled a preliminary report, bypassing the official channels entirely. I had used the access codes on the burner phone to pull the initial, unredacted audit notes the FBI had compiled before the investigation stalled. The key witness Thompson mentioned, the one supposedly in protective custody, was a mid-level Treasury analyst named Sarah Jenkins, who had been the primary contact providing the internal audit leads. At 7 a.m. sharp, the Treasury forensics team, 3 weary-looking CPAs, arrived at my temporary HQ, confusion etched on their faces. "Where is the Deputy Attorney General?" the lead auditor asked, looking around the Spartan room with distaste. "He delegated the initial triage," I said, standing up, my new official ID badge feeling heavy around my neck. "I'm Deputy AG, my name. We're moving fast. Vance's shell corporations are intricate, but they all funnel back through one holding bank in the Caymans. I want every transaction over $50,000 in the last 3 years flagged and cross-referenced against Vance's known political donors. And I need a name on the security detail protecting Sarah Jenkins. The FBI report is outdated. She's not secure. The team, and sensing the sudden raw urgency radiating from this relatively unknown young lawyer, snapped into action. Over the next 12 hours, fueled by sheer adrenaline and the knowledge that David Miller's livelihood hung on my success, we found the smoking gun. Vance hadn't just been paying mercenaries, he'd been using the embezzled money to create a ghost payroll within the state's own security apparatus, effectively paying state-sanctioned security guards to protect his illegal operations and ignore Sarah Jenkins. Just as the sun began to dip below the skyline, casting long shadows across my improvised war room. The forensic team isolated the payment trail for the mercenaries. They weren't anonymous thugs, they were ex-military contractors known for aggressive debt collection and intimidation, and one of the highest-paid members of that security detail, according to the classified payment logs, was the son of a prominent state senator, a senator known to be Vance's staunchest ally. I immediately contacted Thompson via the burner phone. He picked up on the first ring, sounding expectant. "Deputy, report. We have the money trail. Vance paid off 2 separate security details, one internal, one private contract. The private detail is tied directly to Senator Davies' son. And the FBI contact on Sarah Jenkins? The agent listed as her handler in protective custody? He signed off on the last security rotation update 3 days ago, the same day Jenkins vanished from the safe house." There was a long, deadly silence on Thompson's end. Then, a low, satisfied growl. So Vance didn't just hire muscle to intimidate a witness, he bought the protection detail assigned to hide her. "Yes, sir," I confirmed, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles were white. "Vance didn't pay mercenaries to find Jenkins. He paid the system to hand her over. We have the money trail, we have the names of the contractors, and we have the name of the compromised FBI agent. I can have an indictment ready for Vance by dawn, but we need to secure Jenkins immediately before those contractors move her out of state." "Excellent work, Deputy," Thompson said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "The governor wants Vance arrested by sunrise, but we have a complication. I've been monitoring chatter from the old AG's office staff. They know you've been digging independently. They're terrified you'll expose the internal rot before Vance is fully contained." "What's the complication?" I demanded. "The compromised FBI agent handling Jenkins. His name is Agent Reyes. Reyes is currently on reassignment, officially, on leave. But my sources say he's not on leave. He's in the Capitol basement, pulling Jenkins from protective custody right now, preparing to ship her to a black site location outside the state lines before we can serve the warrant." Thompson's voice dropped to a barely audible level, vibrating with intensity. "Deputy, you have the evidence to sink Vance. But if Reyes gets Jenkins out, Vance walks, and we both know what happens next. You have 10 minutes. You know the Capitol's blueprints better than anyone who's ever worked here. You have to get to the basement, find Jenkins before Reyes, and secure her. Do not engage Reyes, just get the witness. If you fail, Vance walks, the state remains poisoned, and I can no longer guarantee David Miller's silence, or yours." The line went dead. I looked around my makeshift command center, the screens glowing with incriminating financial data. The Capitol basement, a maze of forgotten tunnels and obsolete storage rooms beneath the seat of government. Now the scene of an impromptu hostage rescue, and I had 10 minutes to get there, find a missing witness being moved by a compromised federal agent, all while wearing the badge of the state's chief prosecutor. I slammed the burner phone onto the desk, grabbed my car keys, and ran out into the darkening city, knowing that this one, Desperate Dash, was the true test of whether I was Thompson's weapon, or if I could finally turn the state's power against its deepest corruption. The fate of the investigation, David Miller's future, and my own neck, all depended on whether I could find the key witness before the compromised FBI agent locked her away forever in the dark heart of the Capitol.